Patricia, good afternoon, and we can see you. How are you keeping?
I'm great, thanks, Jonathan. And yourself?
I'm very well. What is my distinct pleasure to hand over to you, ladies and gentlemen, Patricia Riley.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm very sorry that I'm not there with you in beautiful Johnstown Castle this morning. I'd love to be there. And congratulations also to the regulator for the first of what I assume will be many conferences, and also on this morning's publication, which I've read a little bit about in the press, but I'm sure I'll hear more about it later. So I'd like to start by setting the scene a little bit. I have a deck of slides. I maybe ask to move on to the first slide, if you don't mind, please. They'll be available later for anybody who wants them, so don't feel that you need to write anything down, or if you're wondering about links and so on, they'll all be available. So this isn't a new topic. To a large extent, farmers have always been price takers, and I think we've always known that. And since 2019, we've had a directive on fair trading practice, the so-called UTP directive. Next slide, please. Can we move on the slides there, please? Oh yeah, we have, thanks. So the discussion took several years, and it's a complicated subject with very many moving parts. That slide there shows you an overview of the different aspects of the challenges around transparency and fairness in the supply chain. Next slide, please. So the Unfair Trading Practices Directive, it lays down minimum rules on enforcement, and member states can adopt national rules that go beyond the UTPs listed, provided, of course, that they're compatible with the single market, with rules for the single market. So we can't build in unfair advantages for a member state, but we can layer on additional rules. So the next slide, please. This just gives an overview of the so-called blacklist of things that are listed in the UTP directive, things like late payments or cancelling orders of perishable goods at short notice. They're just simply forbidden. The next slide shows just an example of what might be grey listed. So these are allowed if a supplier and a buyer agree in advance on particular conditions, things like taking back unsold products, for example. Next slide, please. The national enforcement authorities are given the power to act. And of course, that's where the Agri-Food Regulator, your hosts today, come into play. The next slide, please. And there are rules around, within the Agri-Food Regulator's remit that protect and guide both the complainant and anybody else in the system. So this is our core policy tool, the UTP regulation. It's a baseline, which, as I said before, member states can choose to go beyond. Annual surveys are carried out by the Commission's Joint Research Centre every year, and that gives us an overview of how the directive is being implemented in the different member states, and that will feed into an evaluation of the directive, which is due to come up at the end of this year. So there will be a report, and there is a likelihood at that stage, as announced in the Vision for Agriculture, and I'll come on to that, that the UTP directive most likely will be revised towards the end of this year. So slide 10, please, the next one. But I mean, as we all know, things changed very dramatically a few years ago. We have a huge number of changes as a result of the illegal invasion of Ukraine, increasing prices and so on. We had enormous global changes. So all of those impacts have fed into December last. On the 10th of December last, at the very beginning of this new Commission's mandate, Commissioner Hansen presented two proposals. These, and I'm just looking at my own slides here, so I'll move you on by one, if you may, please, to the next one. The first proposal is for a targeted amendment of the Common Market Organisation, or the CMO regulation, and some of the related acts in the Common Agricultural Policy. And the second is a proposal for the regulation on a strengthened framework for the UTP cross-border enforcement. So the proposals echo the recommendations of the strategic dialogue that President von der Leyen set up after farmers' protests really put a focus on the pressure that farmers were under across Europe, not just in Ireland, but really across Europe. So this responds to calls for much more equitable balance of power in the food chain, and also aiming at effective cross-border cooperation in the enforcement of measures against unfair trading practices. And they're balanced. They uphold the fundamental freedom of free price formation. You'll see that at the bottom of the slide there. But they're at the same time so they're ensuring the rights that the parties aren't restricted beyond what's absolutely necessary. These proposals are quite targeted, and they're outside the normal legislative cycle, if you like. So they were taken on the basis that they were necessary at the time. They address very specific issues, and they will be built upon in the upcoming Common Agricultural Policy proposal for the post-2027 period. And also, of course, in as I mentioned already, the evaluation of the UTP directive that's due later this year, towards the end of the year. Now, I know the upcoming CAP proposal is something that's on a lot of people's minds. I suspect a lot of people in the room there today are also thinking about it, but it's something that we really we will build on that, and very, very central to the whole thing will be the fairness to farmers. As I said before, farmers have always been a vulnerable link in this chain, and that vulnerability really did become much more acute over the last 4 years. So that's why all of these actions have been brought into place. Can I ask you to move on to slide 12, please? Yeah, so the proposal for a targeted amendment to the Common Market Organisation aims at specific limited adjustments to the CMO regulation, and they can be implemented really quickly. So in other words, before the next CAP reform, which by its nature will be big and will take a long time, most likely, to negotiate. In fact, I suspect some of the key negotiations will happen under the Irish presidency, which many of you, I think, in the room will be heavily involved in. So in short, the proposal addresses three main areas. The first being enhanced cooperation within producer organisations and their associations. Secondly, a reinforced framework for written contracts to ensure transparency and stability in that relationship between farmers and buyers, and in price transmission mechanisms. And then thirdly, the promotion of voluntary approaches, which is increasing the possibilities to collaborate on improved social sustainability. Next slide, please. The proposed amendments simplify the recognition process for producer organisations, and they give democratic control. It strengthens the democratic control by clarifying that producer organisations are constituted by the farmer. And to further support producer organisations, the proposal includes the idea of allowing member states to allocate up to 6% of direct payments to operational programs, particularly increasing the budget for fruit and vegetable sectors in countries with low levels of producer organisation implementations. Now, Ireland is in a stronger position, I think, than many member states, where we have a very strong cooperative movement. Producers are well organised. So while indeed it's still obviously something that needs to be tackled at Irish national level, we're probably in the farming sector in Ireland in a better position than many farmers across Europe, which sometimes can be hard to accept, not to accept, but to envisage that others are maybe in a more vulnerable position than others. So depending on the outcome of the evaluation at the end of this year on the UTP directive, the Commission might come up with a legislative proposal. My personal feeling is that we will come up with something, but it's a little early to preempt, because of course whatever comes out in that evaluation will be based on evidence. The objective now at the moment is to implement the targeted changes that I've described in the CMO there. the proposals are with the co-legislators, the Council and the Parliament, and progress has been made, but we still have work to do, for sure. I'll just move on to the next slide, if I may. So I am on, sorry. Could I just go back to the last one if you don't mind? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yes, go on ahead. Sorry, excuse me. So I'm turning now to the UTP cross-border cooperation proposal. So to the next slide, sorry, thank you. So this is another concern that was voiced by farmers, and it's a recommendation of the strategic dialogue, was the need to enhance the cross-border aspect of collaboration to protect farmers' interest. 20% of trade in agricultural products has a cross-border dimension. So that's 1 in 5 transactions or movements of goods have a cross-border dimension, which is quite significant. So this initiative is aimed at improving cooperation between the enforcement authorities. So organisations or regulators like the Agri-Food Regulator in Ireland and its counterparts in other member states. Next slide, please. So this proposal introduces, it introduces a mutual assistance mechanism that provides the enforcement authorities with the possibility of exchanging information, the infrastructure in which to request other enforcement authorities to undertake enforcement measures on their behalf, and to request or other enforcement authorities to enforce their final decisions in the territories and indeed collect penalties. And in cases where at least 3 member states are involved, the proposal lays down rules on how to engage in a coordinated action and how to appoint a coordinator. So that's slide 19, the next one, please. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping ahead there. That's my apologies. If you wouldn't mind just going back a little bit, pardon me. One more. Thanks. I have 2 screens in front of me and I'm confusing myself. Sorry about that. The Commission proposes mechanisms for the enforcement authorities to be able to inform each other about ongoing cases with the aim of ensuring consistent application of the rules across the entire EU. And in the case of widespread unfair trading practices that have a cross-border dimension, the proposal provides for the need to inform the Commission as well, so depending on the seriousness of the case. The Commission is very much aware of different laws and different legal systems in member states, so the proposal aims to respect those national rules, and the collection of information and enforcement is subject to national rules of member states. And we're very cognizant of that, and especially in the ongoing interinstitutional negotiations. And finally, just to be clear that the proposal doesn't interfere with the criminal or judicial systems in the member states individually, or indeed on rules of private international law. So summing up on those 2 proposals, the Commission is taking another step, I would say, in strengthening the position of farmers in the chain, reinforcing their bargaining position and better protecting them against unfair trading practices. These two proposals respond to the most urgent actions identified by the strategic dialogue and the recommendations that were outlined in the vision for agriculture that Commissioner Hansen proposed back, or outlined rather, back in February of this year. So while other aspects and recommendations aren't covered up till now, they'll be addressed next year. And as we discussed the evaluation of the UTP directive and prepare for the next CAP proposals, this is just part of a series of actions that the Commission is trying to take in order to help protect farmers as players in the food chain and the agri-food chain. Next slide, please. And then I'll just turn finally, before we move on to the panel, I'd like to mention the Agri-Food Chain Observatory, yet another acronym, AFCO. The observatory was established a year ago, and again, this stems from a reflection paper in 2024. Its purpose is to better understand the challenges that farmers face and others indeed in the agri-food chain, and to better improve transparency within the supply chain, including when it comes to production costs and margins. The observatory is composed of a group of experts gathering member states and representative of stakeholders active all along the food chain. That includes farmers, input providers, the food industry, retailers, and indeed consumers. The Irish members of the observatory include the Department of Agriculture and the Agri-Food Regulator, very important players, and also Irish citizens and companies are represented at EU level because they're members of many umbrella organisations, representative bodies, producer organisations, and indeed NGOs. The primary objective of the observatory really is to promote a better functioning and more sustainable food chain. The observatory should help to lay the ground for more stable and fair remuneration for the contributions and the work of all the players in the food chain, or in the agri-food chain, including the farmers. Next slide, please. And maybe the one after that, actually, I've skipped over that. Yeah, so the members of the group, they share data and experiences on the functioning of the supply chain, both openly and transparently. And the idea is to exchange information and establish positions on the functioning of the food supply chain based on the available evidence and facts. I think that's a key factor that hasn't been necessarily clear the whole way along. Is evidence is very often missing when we talk rhetorically about food costs and who's being hard done by or who's profiteering. The idea of this observatory is to help really come up with the evidence and the facts so that it's clear to the policymakers and indeed to consumers and to suppliers themselves at primary producer level, as to understand whether they've got getting a fair deal or a fair cut of the profits. It will also help, the observatory will also help to provide expertise and to identify trading practices and contractual arrangements that can either positively or negatively impact the functioning of the agri-food supply chain. And they will in time come up with case studies for specific segments or sectors within the chain, and those will be shared among all of the members. In the medium term, the work of the observatory will be to develop methodologies and indicators to assess and monitor the structure of costs and the distribution of margins and the value added along the food chain. So ultimately, the observatory aims to build trust between everybody along the supply chain, with each other and with the public authorities, and including the Commission. And that will help us a lot in the Commission to form new policy and to finesse what's already there. There are really great expectations of this new observatory. It will run for an initial period of 5 years, and this can be renewed if it proves its worth in that period of time, and I'm pretty confident that it will. It's already met 3 times since last summer, and more meetings will take place this year. I will close on that, and I look forward to taking part in the panel. Thanks very much for your attention.
Patricia Riley, Gura Maha Good, Patricia, thank you very much for that.